In this reflection, I will try to explain the relationship between the law of Christ and the law of Moses. This study will shed light on the instances where Jesus agreed with Mosaic law and where he differed with them. The focus area will be the 10 commandments and the theme of purity. It is in these differences that the theme of grace will stand out to bridge the Old and the New Testament theology. Friends, it is my understanding that Moses and Jesus are the greatest prophets of the Old and New Testament, respectively. It is undisputable fact that Moses is the greatest prophet of all time in the Old Testament, with books of Genesis, Exodus, Deuteronomy, Leviticus, and Numbers attributed to him. Jesus, on the other hand, is a prophet without much in the New Testament, with the story of his life and teaching recorded in the 4 gospel writings, that is Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John. Friends, it is not possible to understand Jesus' perspective on Mosaic law without bringing in the context of the Sermon on Mountain, where Jesus, in his own words, affirmed that he had no issues with the law and prophets. He says, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them." Matthew is a confirmation that Jesus' mission was not contrary to the one that Moses had established. Friends, while Moses is seen to be an outstanding figure in the Old Testament, it is important to acknowledge that Jesus was also present in the Old Testament time, though not in physical and visible human body. This is confirmed in the Gospel of John, which says, "In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning." From this understanding, John believes that this Word was Christ, as he puts it, that the Word became flesh. Therefore, Jesus was in the Old Testament way before and during creation in form of the Word and the Holy Spirit. The greatest commandment, also known as the summary of the law, is the converging point of these two. This is the summary of the famous Mosaic 10 commandments that he received from Mount Sinai, as found in Exodus. It says, "You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make idols. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor, and you shall not covet." Jesus summarized this law without even interrupting with the order in which they are listed. In a way of not using God's name in vain, Jesus prohibits oath in Matthew 5, verse 34. "But I tell you not to swear at all, either by heavens, for it is God's throne." In Matthew 22, verse 37 to 40, he declared, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as you love yourself." The law and the prophets hangs on these two. The first commandment is the summary of the first 4, which are about our loving relationship with God, while the second commandment captures all the remaining 6, which is the relationship between man and man. Jesus is not just affirming the 10 commandments, but he is also making it simpler to understand. Loving God with all the heart, soul, and mind means having undivided focus on him. Loving neighbor as we love ourselves means not even thinking about hurting them. Friends, concerning marriage and divorce law, both Moses and Christ are pro-marriage, which makes them look at divorce negatively from the same perspective. Moses gives an explanation of the only condition that can occasion divorce, as well as the process that leads to it. If a man marries a woman, but she becomes displeasing to him because he finds indecency in her, he may write her a certificate of divorce, hand it to her, and send her away from his house. If after leaving his house, she goes and becomes another man's wife, the second man hates her, writes her a certificate of divorce, hands it to her, and sends her away from his house, or if he dies, then the husband who divorced her first may not remarry her after she has been defiled, for that is an abomination to the Lord. You must not bring sin upon the land that the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance. This is a fundamental teaching in the values that hold marriage together. Jesus' commandment of divorce is well pronounced in the Gospel of Matthew chapter 5 verse 31 to 32. It has also been said, whoever divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. But I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife except for sexual immorality brings adultery upon her. And he who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Friends, while Jesus agrees with Mosaic law in many ways, he takes a different position in others. For example, Moses' law is very clear about Sabbath. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy is the fourth commandment. For in 6 days the Lord made the heaven and the earth, and the sea, and all that is in them. But on the seventh day he rested. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath and set it apart as holy. While the Jews believed that it was a day of total rest without doing anything or being in contact with unholy things, Jesus went against this law and healed the sick on the Sabbath day. This does not look well to the Jews, but Jesus justifies it by challenging the morality and spirituality behind the meaning of Sabbath. By this healing, he demonstrates that life and wellness is more important than hypocritically observing the Sabbath. He uses this healing, which goes against everyone's expectation, to explain what Jesus desires for the Sabbath. His healing and exorcism overcomes the problem of uncleanliness. Concerning food restriction, the Mosaic Law gave a long list of the animals that should not be eaten. You must not eat any detestable things. These are the animals that you may eat: the ox, the sheep, the goat, the deer, the gazelle, the roe deer, the wild goat, the ibex, the antelope, and the mountain sheep. You may eat any animal that has a split hoof divided in two, and that chews the cud. You are not to eat the following: the camel, the rabbit, the rock badger. Although they chew cud, they do not have divided hoof. They are unclean for you, as well as the pig. Though it has divided hoof, it does not chew the cud. It's unclean for you. You must not eat its meat or touch its carcass. Jesus' perspective is totally different. He believes and teaches that there is nothing outside a person that by going in can defile. But things that come out are what defile. The teaching proceeds in verse 18 and 19 that, "Don't you understand either?" He asked, "Can't you see that the food you put into your body cannot defile you. Food doesn't go into your heart, but only passes through the stomach and then goes into the sewer. By saying this, he declared that every kind of food is acceptable in God's eye. Finally, concerning purity, some diseases came with stigma and humiliation, which caused huge suffering to the patients physically and mentally in the society. Leprosy, for example, was regarded as impurity. In the Hebrew culture, purity is so significant to an extent that only those who are pure may come in contact with God. Psalm 24 states that only the one who has clean hand and a pure heart can ascend the mountain of the Lord and stand in the holy place. According to Numbers 5:1-14, then the Lord said to Moses, command the Israelites to send away from the camp anyone with skin disease, anyone who has a bodily discharge, and anyone who is defiled by a dead body. You must send away male and female alike. Send them outside the camp, so they will not defile their camp, where I dwell among them. So the Israelites did this, sending such people outside the camp. They did just as the Lord had instructed Moses. Impurity results from coming into contact with dirty things like corpse, sexual immorality, and many others. His perspective on purity is directly opposite to what Moses believes. Friends, while the Old Testament feels intimidating with wrath, death, vengeance, etc., the grace exhibited and taught by Jesus in the New Testament is firm but forgiving, embracing, and relieving. This doesn't mean that the law of Christ is more superior over Mosaic law, but it is a fulfillment for it. Jesus is trying to give a clear understanding of the difficult Jewish culture against the culture in the contemporary society. He is trying to harmoniously marry the two clashing cultures, time and space, with the gospel.